Hello and welcome to yesteryear's Mac Games, where today I've gotten out the LC2 to play Shadowkeep, an old top-down monochrome CRPG developed by Glenn Seemann and released as Shareware in 1991. This is the most rudimentary game of its type that I've tried, but it's been fun to play through and I was compelled to get to the end. And I think that's a big deal. Those returning to favoured games of yore can persevere through its jank due to nostalgia and familiarity. In comparison, newcomers are less inclined to deal with things like that. So I really do think it's to Shadowkeep's credit that I've enjoyed it all the way through this 7.5 hour playthrough. I'd say it's aged pretty well. I can also tell that it's well thought of by others that have spent time with it. I've seen positive comments dotted around the web, and it's inspired a few people both back in the day and of recent to produce support material, while the CRPG addict, whose blog I found while doing a bit of research on the game, went and called it the best Macintosh exclusive so far. Granted, this was back in 2018 and they hadn't yet tried Taskmaker, but it's still high praise from an expert. Nevertheless, I think it remains a bit hidden. Its pages on the archive sites were a bit underdeveloped, although I've since seen to that, and there are only a couple of gameplay videos online. Perhaps that's because it has in the past been a bit fiddly to get running acceptably in emulation. One can find a playable version of it on archive.org, but like all web mini VMAC instances on there, sound is dodgy, the mouse doesn't line up properly, visuals are squashed unless one full screens it, and it runs too fast. It's great that this is there, but it's a substandard experience and not at all indicative of what Macs were like to use at all. Hardware requirements are modest. It's well suited to a monochrome Mac Plus, although if my LC2 is set to run in colour, then it plays much slower, and I am unsure of the technical reasons behind this. Much like emulators, newer Macs will run Shadowkeep too fast, and while the game can slow itself down, this has its limits and may need help from extensions like G3 throttle to be tolerable on faster power Macs. Sole developer Glenn Seemann was quite the busy bee in Macintosh game development, having worked on many different titles over the years. Most are casual card and puzzle games, which are a dime a dozen, but among them are a couple of Gauntlet clones, a simple platformer called Roboids, and Oberyn, an MMORPG launched in 2005, which, incredibly, is still going. Back in 1991, Seemann was also heavily involved in this here Gamer project, which seems to have been a regional community of devs based upon a BBS. Details of this can be found in the guide document included with the Shadowkeep downloads. It would be great to hear a bit more about what this was like should anyone watching know anything. It feels like a lost world. A brief look over the interface then. Players have a view screen with the, I believe, unnamed character in the middle, although for ease of script writing I'm going to name him Cecil. Hello Cecil. All of the players are free to pick something else. Some stat bars sit in the top right, with some option buttons and an image of Cecil below that, while bringing up the rear is a small window stylised as a scroll that contains info on in-game activity. Despite being a scroll, one cannot scroll, so if some important information gets whisked out of view before one has chance to read it, tough, it's gone. To be honest, the only time I fell foul of this was after a fight with a scorpion when I was unsure if it had gotten a hit in and poisoned me. The game window itself, as is typical for the Mac, floats atop the desktop rather than going full screen and taking it over. Also typical of Mac games is its handling of menu systems. There's no menu screen, with inventory, spells, and equipment bolted into the Apple menu bar. One will get used to this in time, but it remains a little clunky, particularly when trying to do something quickly. Arrow keys move around, but the numpad is easier for the diagonals, particularly if one's keyboard looks like this. The mouse can do it too, and I did use that more than I thought I would. Getting around then is easy enough, although figuring out how to fight might result in a few deaths. But overall, I feel the game is quite accessible, and doesn't take long to get a handle on. So what's going on in this here game? The long and short of it is that the realm of Shadowkeep is in dire peril. The Evil Overlord, who has been defeated once before, has returned, and stolen an Ankh from the Temple of Life. Cecil then has taken it upon himself to sort this out and must journey across Shadowkeep and beyond to assemble what's required to defeat the Overlord and return the realm to peace and prosperity. So there's enough story here to explain why Cecil is on his quest, but it certainly isn't a ripping yarn in itself. Support material, which I'll touch on later, does flesh everything out, but I'm unsure if this is official. Now, the rest of this video will largely be structured around what happens in the game, so if you fancy trying it out yourself and don't want to hear solutions, this is probably a good time to end playback. Come back when you're done though, yeah? So, Upon starting a new game, players will find themselves outside Castle Shadowkeep. Hostiles will start spawning in immediately, although there is an invisible force field around the starting area. With no weapons to hand, it's best to head into the castle to see what's what. Inside, charging due north will take Cecil to the royal chamber, where the king, queen, some guards, and the jester are milling around doing not a lot. Conversing with NPCs will provide the player with a loose understanding of what's going on and what to do. Dialogue is progressed by typing in keywords, a mechanic popularised by the early Ultima games, which made its way into a number of other CRPGs of the time, including Exile. Conversations in games today tend to default to dialogue trees, but I can see why this was popular for a time. Keyword guessing does feel like the player is a little more involved in the game, in an era where immersion was a lot harder to create and maintain due to graphical and sound limitations. Anyway, asking everyone their name and their job will usually throw up one or two other keywords that can deliver a useful answer. Once one has been found, I'd recommend jotting it down, as the majority of other NPCs will have some sort of response to it. The next thing to do is explore the castle. This is achieved by running around and tapping S to search next to as many things as one can bear. All sorts of walls and furniture can turn into items, or gaps that lead to items, and this is how a player can get an initial float of gold to buy their first weapon and armour. There's a lot of similar looking rooms to open with a lot of identical NPCs within, who all offer the same conversations. I actually regretted letting them all out by opening the doors, as they did a really good job of standing in the middle of the corridors and getting in the way. Anyone with something unique to say will generally look unique, while the regular NPCs will hint of their existence when correctly prompted, although they seldom offer locations. Thus, my search for Katrina to find out what the Guardian was took a silly amount of time, which led me to the conclusion that the castle really is far too big. Granted, an actual castle is also a vast structure with rooms for lots of irrelevant people, so points for realism, I suppose. So what can we learn from these discussions? Well, everybody knows that the Ankh has been nicked from the Temple of Life, and everyone knows that they're in a spot of bother, as that's where all the life force comes from. I'm not sure what life force is, but there seems to be enough left to keep going on for the foreseeable. The population is concerned, and some are getting ill, but they aren't all flailing around like headless chickens in panic, or indeed, doing anything about it. A number of them also know where the Overlord is currently hanging out, as well as what to do to discover how he can be defeated. This knowledge is held by a mermaid, and only one person knows about those. We'll have to go looking for him. Keep your eyes peeled for someone who looks slightly different. He's got a cutlass and a peg leg. That'll do it. Right, so to talk to the mermaid, the player needs a specific bit of foliage. There is someone who can help Cecil find that, but I happened to bump into it before I knew what it was for. Further tidbits of information that I got from chit-chatting covers a handful of the items that the player will need, alongside some details about some of the game's locations. There's an amulet somewhere, which according to Innkeeper Thaldo, will assist an adventurer navigate a labyrinth. There are far lands over the Great Sea. The Guardian was the result of a statutory off-road notification, so perhaps whatever that is can be driven around. Oh, hang on. No, Sorn is a wizard. A dead one. The Evil Overlord is currently sat about in a cave. How evil. And is purportedly afraid of anyone holding a grail. Report to the Jester for more info on that. And remember to spell it correctly. Said Jester is present in the About box, and explains that the Grail will protect people from the Overlord's magic, so that's definitely something for the shopping list. It's guarded by the undead demon knights in the catacombs, and I'm sure there's more to learn on top of that, but at this point, that's plenty to go on. All of this information seems to be available from the off, and as NPCs don't go anywhere, if one forgets anything at all, they can be asked again. There are some dotted around in the overworld too that share a lot of the same answers, so a quick refresher is never far away. Anyway, once one has uncovered a few clues, a few coins, and some venom potions, it's time to leave the castle and venture forth into the wilderness to find one or all of the items that have been mentioned. First stop should be the nearby village, specifically the shop. Buy something to defend oneself with, and then start a rumble. Combat is somewhat basic and instigated upon contact with something. It is possible to get the first blow in, but there's a knack to it, and so not always possible. Cecil and whatever he's fighting will take turns hitting each other, with there being no obvious hit points on the monsters. They will gradually progress from slightly injured, through to moderately injured, critically injured, and then finally expiring. Attacking is input with the L or R button depending on what hand the weapon is in, or by clicking on the specific arm on Cecil's portrait to the right of the screen. Items or spells can be used in combat, with the added fiddle of having to place those things into a free hand before using it. This is a pain in the arse. I have a full keyboard here, so why not just use the H key to guzzle a health potion? Instead, I'm simulating fannying through a rucksack to get an object out before using it. If it's a spell scroll, it also needs to be put back. Killing things and using spells level up the fighting skill and spell skill respectively. These appear to cap out at level 10, but such is the imprecise nature of combat, it is difficult to really perceive any improvements as they go up, a bit like picking up coins in Mario Kart. The first place to try and get Cecil over to is the Wizard's Hut. Here, one can purchase some spells, but more importantly, poison antidotes. These are critical for overworld travel, as one hit from a scorpion or spider will fill Cecil with poison. Unfortunately, they aren't cheap, or at least not by early game standards. It is possible to haggle to bring the prices down, but only to a certain extent. Push it too far and the shopkeeper will be permanently offended, jacking the item's price up beyond its original one, where it will stay for the rest of the game. Having gotten here, the next thing I did was a heap of tedious grinding for fighting experience and gold, with this process duly extended by a few mistakes. I found a handful of later game locations, including a cave full of rust monsters, which disintegrated the metal weapons and armour that I had just purchased. So, it was back to the dagger for a bit. Grim. One enemy of note is the pirate ship. Yes, an entire ship of pirates. Overcoming what I assume are multiple individuals on a boat grants the player permanent use of it afterwards. There's a set number of these, but plenty enough to have several available in key locations. I also made a bridge out of a couple of spares. There are a few islands that are only accessible with the boat, and an NPC tucked away who may or may not have unique dialogue. I didn't recognise any, but the main use of these is really to just speed up travel times. Eventually, I went back to the castle to see if I... Oh, right, yes. The guards will attack the player if they're running around with their chopper out. Best to tuck it out of sight. Now, as I was saying, back to the castle to locate its dungeon. This took forever. One of those situations where it was in the one room I hadn't properly searched, with there, of course, being no visual indication as to which of the many identical chambers it was. I did finally manage to find Katrina, though, who said that one of Sorn's actual bones was needed to pass the Guardian. The executioner elaborated on this, revealing that the bone is in the dungeon. Cool, you're an executioner. You should know all about this dungeon. How do I get in? No help there then. Side note, I also found the treasury. It's entirely possible to ransack the entire thing. The guards don't take too kindly to this though. I wouldn't recommend it. On a more positive note though, I finally found the dungeon. Hooray! I would liken it to a spreadsheet. Rows and columns of usually featureless rectangles make it difficult to remember where Cecil has been. Pausing the game between almost constant fights in order to draw a map isn't such a bad idea. There is a section above here, however, that contains a conversible NPC. This is where John can be found, who is raising giant birds, which are aggressive. When asking other NPCs for help, they will tell the player that this is the fella to find to get a hint. But I, and a number of other people that have played this game, couldn't get anything out of him, aside from what appears to me to be a couple of references to other games. Back to the spreadsheet, Sorn's bone is in one corner, and the amulet is in another, with the latter being a good indication of where to go next. The labyrinth that this will help traverse was constructed by gnomes that inhabit some of the villages. It is, however, a gnomish secret, so the player will need to scour all of their houses until the entrance is uncovered. Entering with the amulet reveals some helpful arrows, without which traversing this sizable maze could take forever. There's not a whole lot of treasure in here, so it's not really worth trying other routes. Ooh, wait. Is that a new spell? Oh. Much running around later, the player will emerge in the Farlands. There are a handful of things to go look at here, with the main one being the Guardian. With Sorn's bone in one hand, and his wand in the other. This wand, by the way, was something I just so happened to find in the castle, but no one had anything to say about it, so whipping it out here with the bone was a bit of a guess. The player can journey past the Guardian, and also within. There's a spell in here that I never put to any use, and some potions of magic recovery that are not purchasable and should be used intelligently. On the other side of the Guardian is a unicorn, and it was at this point that I had to reach for some help, as I had no idea what was supposed to happen here. Ask the unicorn about the fabled black sword, which was used to defeat the Overlord the first time round, and they will reveal its location. It's just over to the left. Players searching every single object in the game will have eventually found it via brute force, but I'm not sure this is something I would have encountered on my own. The unicorn isn't a keyword that's going to occur to anyone until they see it wandering around, and the responses to that are information sparse. The Black Sword is the most powerful weapon in the game, and does notably speed up battles, so it's very welcome. It doesn't get eaten by rust monsters either, so it's safe to take into caves. There's a small one of these in the far lands to rummage around in. There's a spell in it, although not a useful one. Banish immediately gets rid of hostiles, but it uses a fair bit of magic, which I preferred to reserve for healing Cecil. To finish off the Farlands, grab a scroll from the Temple of Magic, and steal the Quill of Transport from a gnome's house to return to the realm of Shadowkeep without having to faff around in the labyrinth. So with the Overlord busting, Black Sword secured, the next thing to grab is the Holy Grail, so that Cecil might last long enough to actually get a swing in. This resides within the Catacombs, which is quite a fun part of the game. The design of this area is a series of distinct shapes and chambers. It's full of treasure, although it's a tad redundant this late in the game, and it's also chock full of skellybobs that the player can overcome in a few different ways. A potion of invisibility will allow the player to walk around them for a time. Alternatively, if Cecil found the spell Turn Undead, that will have them run away for a bit. And of course, fighting one's way through is always an option. Using the magic potions here can minimise having to exit the dungeon to visit the inn to recharge strength and magic. At the end of all of this is Zalthor, the skeletal leader of the undead demon knights that Cecil has been smashing to pieces down here. Compelled to guard the Grail Chamber for reasons I didn't catch, Zalthor will permit entry if the player has visited the small temples dotted around to discover the name of the gods, which must be spoken aloud to access the Grail. He doesn't say a whole lot else. Whew, we're almost there then, just one dungeon left. The final caves that the player must traverse to showdown against the Evil Overlord contain the most powerful enemy in the game. Wasps. Giant wasps though, capable of relieving Cecil of his life in 3 hits. The added complication here is that the player may wish to wield armour immune to the rust monsters for most of the cave, before quickly switching to the better stuff whenever a wasp buzzes in. Lining everything up right so as to be the one that starts the encounter for the all-important first strike is vital with these things. Players will gradually fight their way across to the Evil Overlord, who is hanging out with a handful of monsters in a small clearing. This is it. Every step, every fight, every misspelt keyword has culminated into this final, fateful confrontation. So, Black Sword in one hand, Grail in the other, it's time to encounter a Overlord. Do not, under any circumstances, unequip the Grail. When healing is needed, switch out the sword, or it's insta-death. The final fight is certainly a little more complicated than the normal ones, so while it's not really what one might call a boss battle, it is a satisfying closing scrap. It wasn't particularly easy and did take me a few attempts. Get it all right, and the Evil Overlord vanishes. Poof. Leaving behind the Ankh. Super duper. No body though, so perhaps deliberately left wide open by Glenn Seemann should he have decided to make a sequel. The final thing to do is get out of the cave. Saving first, or the player might have to do the Overlord fight again, should they let their guard down on the way back and get careless with a wasp. Take the Ankh back to the Temple of Light where it was found, and maybe put in a suggestion for some protective glass around it so that this doesn't happen again. A nifty little sequence will then play out which bounces around the screen for whatever reason. Cecil will get a personal thank you from King Mondor and become an honorary knight. Not a real one, despite having the combat prowess to take on a Overlord. No gold either, or land, or a feast, not so much as a crudité. We only saved Shadowkeep, and everyone in it after all. Ah well. Here concludes the adventure, with one final chance to view the character statistics. Looks like I failed to max out magic. And with that, I can turn the colour back on. Downloads of Shadowkeep come with this useful short guide by Bob Nordling. It contains the backstory, although I don't really know if this is official, or if Bob added it in. Perhaps Bob added it in and it was made official. If anyone knows anything, please pipe up in the comments. This document is also a handy source of hints that can assist the guessing of some of the keywords, so it's definitely worth perusing before jumping in. All in all, Shadowkeep is a solid little CRPG that is definitely worth giving a shot. It offers a rudimentary but satisfying experience that won't take too long, particularly if one makes use of the maps, hints, and playthrough videos that are available on the web. I genuinely think that classic hardware is the way to play this, as interacting with an old Mac just better suits interacting with old titles. Perhaps this assists in making the player a bit more tolerant of the parts of the game that haven't aged so well, and reinforce that one is interacting with software very much frozen in time. I do feel that it's a major part of the vibe that only benefits this type of escapism that classic computer games provide. Shadowkeep is a great example of a small shareware CRPG from its era. Its monochrome graphics are charming, there's lots to explore, and it never felt unfair or broken at any point, while also never feeling vapid and pointless. Its scenario doesn't really push any boundaries, but when compared with other shareware offerings of the time, it's actually quite developed. I mentioned earlier that Shadowkeep was new to me. I can't remember how I bumped into it, but if my playthrough had happened before I did the top 50 Mac shareware games video, this would be right up there. Bag a download from the archive sites, and let me know what you think of it in the comments section, and we'll leave it there. This has turned out way longer than I expected it to. For more reviews of old Mac games, check out the rest of my channel, and be sure to subscribe to keep on top of future content. More is in the works. Thanks for watching then, and see you next time.